Hello, good morning or good afternoon as it is now, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this Ideate Software webinar this morning. I'm excited to present this. This should be a really interesting session, all about Revit model maintenance and Revit model performance. And I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, who is Olivia Morgan. So Olivia is a design technology specialist with a background in BIM and digital tools, and she's currently working as a BIM manager at Smith Group, who are a large architectural practice based in the US, have over 20 offices, over 1,000 people, so really big company. She's also an instructor and a content creator on LinkedIn, and I will put a link to some of her courses on LinkedIn Learning in the question panel a little bit later on. She has extensive experience in working in project management, client collaboration, and looks to drive innovation in design technology through in complicated, complex building projects. So that is our speaker this morning. I think most of you know who I am. If you don't know, my name is Steve Deadman. I'm the Customer Success Manager for Ideate Software. And I'll be looking at the question panel, manning your question panel, answering your questions and answering anything you have on the chat. So please feel free to add anything you have in there. This session is being recorded, so anyone who registered for the session will get a copy of the recording later on today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Olivia. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Well, very happy to be back here again. I actually presented on these topics a few months ago for the American audience. I'm very happy to be back to present to the European audience on these same topics, a topic I'm really excited about, which is model maintenance. For the remainder of this presentation, I am going to turn off my video just for performance purposes. But as I understand, everyone can see my Revit screen. Is that correct? We're still good to go?
Yeah, I can see it, Olivia.
Awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing my webcam and begin the presentation. So we're here today to talk about model maintenance, which is essentially good workflows and practices to get the best performance you can out of your Revit model. And maybe a lot of the people on the call here today have experienced a slow running Revit model, right? Maybe it's taken a while to synchronize, maybe it's taking a while just to save the model or open the model. And in a worst case scenario, it takes a long time just to draw out model elements in your 3D views. So practicing model maintenance and these good modeling practices is going to prevent those issues from happening and hopefully give you back more time in your day to do other things. And the name of the game for model maintenance is basically element reduction in your model and element organization. So I'm going to be focusing a lot today on workflows using Ideate Explore, and the remainder of this presentation is just going to be me doing live demos, and we'll have some questions at the end if we have any time. But I'm going to be showing you some workflows with Ideate Explore, hopefully workflows that maybe new users can take advantage of if you've never used this tool, and I'll also cover some more maybe advanced tools that the BIM manager might want to try out that they haven't tried before. So all of the topics that I'll be covering today are a very abbreviated version of the LinkedIn Learning course that I have on the same topic called Revit Model Maintenance. You should be able to find it if you just search Revit Model Maintenance or my name. But if any of these topics today sound interesting, I definitely would check out that LinkedIn Learning course. I go into much more detail on all of these different topics. But to achieve model maintenance, the first step is actually getting a handle of our model metrics. So what I mean when I say model metrics are basically our element counts and keeping certain element counts in check. So here I have my reduced list of elements in Revit that could potentially cause performance issues if they are in excess in your model. And along with that, I also have a threshold that I think these elements should be under. And this is just a starting point. So things in general, just general rules of thumb, things like detailed groups, imports, in-place families, design options, these in excess all contribute to a slow running model. So having a good handle on your model metrics is a really great way to just understand the current state of your model and keep some of these numbers in check. And I'm sure if there's any, BIM managers on the call today, they might be, they might have their own numbers, they might have their own thresholds, right? They might think, oh, my views not on sheet is way too high. You might want to keep that down to 500 or so. But I really wanted to put a number to these categories to focus up conversations with the rest of the team. So for instance, if I know our model groups is really out of hand, it's like in the thousands, we know as a team to focus our efforts at that cleanup versus, if our design options are really below 20, we don't have to divert as many resources to that cleanup and organization. So this is really about prioritizing how the team attacks certain issues. So these are my list of potential problem areas, but the tool that I use to get an immediate gut check of all of these numbers to start out with is Ideate Explorer. So this is going to be a tool that we come back to again and again during this presentation, but it's really my Swiss Army knife to get a better handle of what's happening in my model here. And I usually have the display for most of my projects set to entire project and sort by category. So when I started working with Ideate Explorer, I kind of had a hard time understanding the use cases for it. I thought it was some sort of variation of the project browser, but it's really so much more than that. Ideate Explorer allows you to get immediate counts of all of these different categories that we're looking at, and we can immediately drill down and select these individual elements to get more information about what we're looking at. So here I get a complete list of all of the elements, right, in my model, and I can already see right off the bat that I have maybe too many imports in my model right here, and I have the ability to open up any one of these categories and really drill down and get a feel for what's in the model, and I can get individual counts of these types. I can then select these elements, get information about the property panel, select it again, get even more information down here, and I can even double click to open up a view to see what's going on here. So this is a really great assessment tool just to get an immediate piece of information of the current state of your model. And it's very user-friendly too, even if you're a little bit newer to Revit. I show new users Ideate Explorer, and it becomes like their go-to tool for all things Revit. So this is my starting point for understanding model metrics, and we'll come back to Ideate Explorer in a bit here. But another tool that I wanted to point to your attention to get model metrics is Ideate Automate. All right, so Ideate Automate is a separate standalone tool that automates certain practices within Revit. It does things like automatically print on a recurring basis, publish your model, do things like file maintenance, and this can all happen on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. It can happen on cloud models. It can happen on server-based projects, I should say. And the topic that we're going to be focusing on today is model health. So Ideate by default has within their general tasks a health check. So this is basically running metrics report on the model that you point to. And it's giving us a lot of these metrics, right, that I'm seeing here today. So I really like using this tool because this can be set on a schedule and I don't really have to think about it too much after it's been set up. Now, I'm not going to go through all the steps in today's presentation because it does require the model to be open, but I will take a moment to show you the output from this health report. All right, so here we are on the Excel screen. It's basically just an Excel report output. And here you can start to see a lot of these categories being counted again. So things like warnings, in-place families, model lines. And along with these counts, it also has in red tiles when I am above my set threshold. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm sure other BIM managers on the call have their own thresholds, and whether or not these tiles show up in red is something that can be set in the template file here. So that is set up in the pivot metric values here. So here I have all of these numbers set up to be the same thresholds that are in kind of my starting list here. And that is what is dictating what is shown here in red. So you can have some level of customizability when looking at these numbers. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how to customize these metrics even further, I am doing a presentation, I believe on February 5th with Ideate on a very similar topic, but this is just a starting point and you can really get a lot just out of the template file here. But this file in isolation, packed away in your folders, isn't so useful, right? We want to get this information out in front of the rest of the team, out in front of the project manager. So another tool that I wanted to show you is using Ideate Sticky in tandem with this Ideate Automate output. So imagine I'm setting up this report to run maybe on a weekly basis to get a check on these metrics. And I want to display that information in our Revit project. So almost all Revit projects are going to have a primary opening screen, and this is a fantastic place to set up some of our metrics here. So I'm going to use Ideate Sticky. I'm going to go to my Ideate Software tab, and I'm going to click on Sticky here. And this is going to allow me to stick on my Excel document. So I'm going to choose the Word, PDF, and Excel image version because that's going to display our red colors a little bit better. And I'm just going to go to Create. And I'm going to navigate to that export right here. And we have the ability to select multiple sheets from this Excel document, but I'll just choose Summary for now, right? That's going to be our primary piece of information. And I'm going to click OK. All right, and here's the cool part. We can actually click on Auto Update here. And as Ideate Automate is updating this Excel document, so too will this document within our Revit model. So we don't even have to pull up Explore or any other tool. It's just going to show up every time someone opens up the model. So I'll go ahead and click Show. And I will X out of this. And here we go. Very nice. So this is a fantastic communication tool for the rest of the team to better understand kind of the rules of engagement within Revit and hopefully make people more aware of the elements that they create. And even newer users to Revit hopefully can start to look at some of these metrics and understand, oh, in-place families are a problem, imports are a problem, and it starts the conversation to make people have more ownership over the elements that they're creating in the model, or at least that's the hope, of course. Okay, so with that, we have a good starting point to understand how to track our metrics with Ideate, Automate, and Explore. Now, for the rest of the presentation, I actually want to focus on how we actually prevent some of these issues from, getting into excess and how we clean them up if they do become a problem on the project. So I don't have time to cover all of these individual topics in today's presentation, but I did want to cover an isolated list of some of these elements. And in my LinkedIn Learning course, I do go through each one of these topics with at least one video, if not two videos, to better expand how to do some of these workflows. But I'm just going to be focusing today on imports, groups, reference planes, views not on sheets, and warnings. And the reason that I wanted to focus up on these individual categories here is, first off, because I think they play a pretty big impact in the model for performance. And also, there's a lot of great workflows that we can take advantage of with Explore to help reduce and get a better handle on some of these elements. And each one of these topics is going to follow a very similar structure, where I'm going to talk first why it's an issue, when I usually see it in the project, how you clean up or prevent this issue, and I'll hopefully, with each one of these topics, maybe cover a more advanced topic that as an older, more seasoned user might be able to take advantage of that they might have not considered before. So with that, let's start with imports. I usually recommend having no imports in my model. And imports, are really the bane of my existence. They cause a lot of issues in the model, and they cause issues for two main reasons as far as I can tell. First off, Revit is not great at processing non-native Revit geometry. I know, shocking, not all Autodesk products communicate perfectly with each other, but it really is the case. And then secondly, these types of imports don't just bring in the import, they also bring in a lot of extra junk, usually in the form of like annotation elements. And these elements are usually quite hard to clean out of the model if you don't have a special set of tools to identify them. They're just kind of sitting in the model unused. And that's really against our concept of element reduction in the model, right? So the solution to imports really depends on the type of import that you're or the type of element that you're bringing into the model. So for instance, I see instances like this where someone's bringing in a detail if a team is maybe transitioning from AutoCAD into Revit, they're bringing in some legacy details. Or for instance, like in this example, there's a cut sheet that's been given to you by the manufacturer, and you have to somehow incorporate it into your construction documents. So in this example, I would recommend, instead of importing this example directly into Revit, to instead import this into a family. So I usually recommend going to File, New, Family, and then choosing something like a detailed item to isolate. Something like a detailed item. And if you really must import something into the model, at the very least, it's being imported into a family where this extra junk is kind of isolated to that family. So it's not a perfect workflow, but it can really get the job done if you have to get in some of these elements like cut sheet elements. And the other time that I see people accidentally importing elements into the model is if they're trying to bring in things like plans or site plans, that kind of stuff. So we really want to encourage people in those scenarios to, instead of importing CAD, to link in that CAD every single time. So that's my little PSA there. But to really hammer home this point of extra junk and elements in the model, I wanted to point your attention to the Style Manager. This is a really interesting tool. This tool allows you to get a handle of all of the different styles in your model, and is also able to identify if two different styles have different names, but the exact same properties. And Style Manager is able to merge those elements together in your model, which is really great because this is another tool that we can use to reduce the elements in our model very quickly. For today's topic on imports, let's look at our line patterns. So here we can see all of our line patterns currently in our model, right? And some of these, probably look Revit native, but if I were to search for import, you can see that we have all of these different line patterns that we're probably not using, and these were very likely brought in by the imports in our model. So this is kind of the hidden cost of all of these imports in our model. They're hard to find sometimes, and it's hard to understand the cost of them. So I've had cases where even getting rid of 5 imports in a model drastically improved the performance of the model, just because there's all of this extra weight associated with each one of these imports. All right, okay, so there you go. With that, let's switch gears and talk about our next topic, model and detailed groups. And I'm going to talk about both of these topics in the same breath because they have similar costs to the model, but also similar solutions. And I usually recommend having no more than 100 detailed groups in a model and 50 model groups in a model. So I usually see detailed groups crop up in a model during the initial phases of construction documentation. And this usually happens when maybe one person makes a really nice model group, but then another user might come in and duplicate it a million times. This is really not the most efficient way to represent elements in Revit. A more efficient way would be in a family. And I usually see model groups crop up in a project during maybe schematic design or design development phase. where we're trying to get a lot of design model elements out quickly. Now, I'm not necessarily against this strategy. I think this is a really great way to get design out very quickly. The problem comes up when these elements, these group elements, show up in excess. So my general rule of thumb is if a model group shows up more than 3 times in your project, it usually means you either need to ungroup that element or you need to turn it into a family. So in this case, I'd recommend turning this model group maybe into furniture system, a system family. And for most detailed groups, I'd recommend potentially turning this into a detailed item. And this is a much more efficient way for Revit to understand and process this information. Now, the tool that I use to get a better handle on all of these different groups is, you guessed it, Ideate Explorer. And I used Ideate to actually find these detailed groups in the first place for this presentation, but it's really my starting point to kind of navigate throughout the project. So once again, I have my display set to entire project, sort by category, and let's go down and check out our groups right here. And I'm going to expand this. And this will take a second, but this is going to show me both itemized list of my detailed groups and my model groups. And there's quite a few in this model, so it's taking a moment. Okay. So here we have over 1,000 detailed groups and over 200 model groups. So this is way above my threshold of what I'd like to see, and it probably means that I want to do a little bit of extra cleanup. So the easiest way to get rid of model groups is literally ungrouping the elements. That's not always the solution, but what I see often when looking at these projects is I'll see these array groups. I'll see hundreds of thousands of these array groups, and maybe some people on the call know how these are generated, but this usually happens when new users or newer users to Revit come in, select an element, and then run the array command. And by default, Revit is going to automatically group and associate those arrayed items, whether or not the user is aware of that. So it's good to know that feature so that you can uncheck it when you run that array command. But I wanted to point out these array groups because they're usually really easy wins to get rid of in the project. So I've mentioned in the past, I can check this on to select it, get some property information. I can click it on in Ideate to get some information down here. And I can even get information like who created this element that could be useful later. And I can even go to the extent of double clicking on this and actually opening up a view associated with this array group item. So already I can see that we have a set of grouped lines. I'm guessing that the user didn't mean to group these lines together, right? But this is a really easy thing to get rid of. And in most cases, I have no problem checking on multiple array groups and just ungrouping them in the model. So this can be a really quick and easy way to get rid of, 106 groups. Now, you might get better performance output by ungrouping or making into a family a more complex group. But sometimes when you're cleaning up a model, you just need an easy win, and this is still getting rid of groups and still contributing to better performance. So I just wanted to point this out because Ideate makes it so easy to select these elements, whether you can see them or not in the project, and ungroup them and do that immediate cleanup. So really useful. I'm going to check none for now. And one last word that I'd like to talk about on groups is how we might solve things like model groups with families. So in this scenario right here, we have a grouping of a desk and a chair. And instead of representing this as a group, I might recommend representing this as a system family. So I've actually already created a system family for this, and it was quite easy to do at my workstation here. Very nice. And it looks very, very similar to our original grouping here, right? Not only that, I actually replaced the chair with a native Revit geometry versus this chair, which is a meshed-based family. So we're already getting better performance as compared to this grouping. So the way we would solve this issue is we would actually edit the group. And then in here, I would place my component. Place it right on top. I'll hit double escape to get out of that. Then I would tab in to select these other elements, delete them out of the model, or excuse me, delete them out of the group. And now when I click finish, that is going to replace the system family with all of these groups. So when I looked at this project last, that was 40 instances of this group. So I'm not going to complete this task now because it does take a moment, but you are immediately getting rid of these grouping of elements. And after that, you can just select the elements and ungroup them, and you've immediately gotten rid of 40 complex groups in your model. So it's a fairly easy process. But for now, I'm just going to cancel out of that. And I'm going to say yes. I do want to cancel out of this, but that would be the workflow we would use to clean up these types of groups. Okay. With that, let's get on to our next topic, reference planes. Now, I recommend having no more than 500 reference planes in your Revit project. And you might think that's a pretty large number, but this number can get really out of hand, especially in design projects. And I usually see reference planes kind of misunderstood and misused within the Revit model. I've seen reference planes used in place of grids. I've seen them in place of match lines. And I've also seen them used in 2D views, which really isn't the best use case for reference planes. So reference planes have three-dimensionality to them. They're not just lines, and you're not really taking advantage of that three-dimensionality when you put them in 2D drafting views like this. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with using reference planes to draft out a bunch of information, but once you're done using them, especially in these 2D views, I would recommend deleting them. Now, if you really must keep a reference plane, there are some good use cases for that in the Revit project. I would recommend clicking on it and giving it a good name so you know what it's for, right? And then pinning it in place so it doesn't shift around. And I usually find that there's more use cases for reference planes within the Revit family editor versus the Revit project proper. So the way that we can clean up these reference planes is, you guessed it, using Ideate Explorer. And once again, this is how I found this example piece for today's presentation. I was able to just look through my list and click through and find where there's a lot of these reference planes. Okay. And let's scroll down to our reference planes. Once again, display set to entire project, sort by category. Okay, here we go. And we have 202 reference planes. So that's well below my target threshold to be under, but there's still always room for improvement. And the reason I wanted to talk about reference planes is because they're usually pretty easy to clean up without a lot of heartbreak. And I just expanded that to get a better handle of what these reference planes are doing in the model here. Okay, we have 202 weak references. Let's open that up even more. And I am seeing some things that I like here. I do see a few reference planes that are well named. This is good practice, but I also see 197 reference planes that are unnamed. And usually when I'm doing model cleanup, I'll communicate with the team that I'm doing this cleanup. I'll tell them I'm focusing on these categories, including reference planes. But after I do that, I usually don't have that much heartbreak over selecting all of these and just deleting them out of the model, right? A lot of these are kind of created and then forgotten about. Now, let's say you don't want to go scorched earth on your reference planes. You want to come in maybe with a more fine-tooth comb and identify where these reference planes are in 2D views only, like this example that we're seeing right here. for that workflow, I wanted to show you how to create custom filters to be very particular on how you select elements in your model. So I haven't talked too much about filters yet, but it's a really useful tool to use within Ideate Explorer. So if I pull this down, you can see that there's a lot of pre-built filters with Ideate. You could filter to only model elements, only annotation elements. One I really like is in-place families, because that's another item that plays a huge role in model performance. But you can also create custom filters for your own workflows. So I want to create a custom filter for reference planes so I can make custom selections within my project. The way we do that is we go to the little sprocket here, go to Manage Rules, and here you can see all of my current filters, right? And I want to create a new one, and I'm going to create a new one for reference planes. Click that on, hit Next. All right. And at this point, we could actually even further filter the reference planes that we're looking at in Explorer. I could choose by property, and I could filter by literally any property associated with reference planes. For today's demo, I'm not going to do that, but this is hopefully getting you in the mindset to kind of use this tool, and maybe you can think of your own workflows that could apply to this. For now, I'm just going to focus on filtering out my reference planes here. So with that, I'm going to hit Save and Close and hit OK. There we go. And usually I have to refresh this interface to fully activate the filter here. So I'll hit Refresh. All right. So now we get a reduced view of what we want to focus on. And you might be thinking to yourself, why do we go through all that trouble to do this? Well, the reason that I like using this workflow is not only do I get this isolated view of what I'm interested in, but I can also use this Ideate selection tool. So we probably already know that in Revit itself, you can filter by elements after you select them. But with this Ideate tool, you can actually preemptively filter elements. So if I only want to select reference planes in my model, I can click that on and just go ahead and click and drag, and now I'm locked to only selecting reference planes. So this can be a really efficient way to go through cleanup. I can just run through each one of my 2D drafting views and detailed views and have this filter on and just select, get rid of my reference planes that I know aren't having as big of an impact in usage in the model. So this is a really, hopefully, quick tool that you can use in your own workflows, and hopefully you're thinking of your own filters that you might want to create for your own projects. All right. So with that, let's go on to our next topic, views not on sheets. So in my projects, I would hope there to be only two types of views. Views on sheets, those ones that are going to be incorporated into our construction documents that have a purpose, and working views. And we get performance issues when these working views start to show up in excess. And usually this comes about when people, create views and then forget that they have created them. And usually the preventative method of preventing too many views not on sheets is to have really good browser organization, and also communicate with the team the importance of naming your views if you'd like to create them. And in this conversation, not all views are created equal. There's some views that have a higher performance cost. So for instance, views that are 3D, that have a lot of elements in view, that have a fine detail level, that have some maybe specific graphic display options, those are the views that play the highest impact in our model. And they play an impact whether or not you have them open. They can contribute to longer opening times, longer sync times, and so on. And I've even had some weird cases where one 3D view in our project prevented the model from being published to BIM 360. So there's a lot of weird oddities that these excess views can cause. So if you really must keep something like a complex 3D view in your project, at the very least, I would try to go through a practice of reducing the number of elements in that view. So for instance, I can't see any plumbing fixtures, right, in this current view right here, but nevertheless, they are playing an impact in this current view, and they have a performance cost in the model. So what I'd like to do is try to reduce everything that I can't see in the model, that I don't care about. So I'll usually try to go through my visibility and graphics, maybe create a template for this, and turn off elements that I don't want to see, like plumbing fixtures and maybe furniture, for instance. So these are quick ways to kind of make your 3D views a little bit more efficient. So I can hit OK. And going through this practice of your views can really help improve performance. So Revit out of the box has some methods to identify views that are not on sheets. So right now in our project browser, you can see that our view type is set to all. We can actually set that to not on sheets, right? And then this shows us all of the many, many views that are not on sheets. And some of these views we might want to keep, right? There's purpose to keeping working views, but a lot of these views we probably don't need. People probably forgot that they made them, right? So this is a really useful way to isolate those views that are not on sheets. But a tool that I usually prefer to use instead of the project browser is Ideate Explorer. This tool also can isolate views in a very similar way and distinguish between on sheet and not on sheet. So let's go down to our views. Open this up, we have 1,000 total. And this is going to give us a really similar kind of structure and output that the project browser gives us, but we have a few more features we can take advantage of. Okay, so here we can see not on sheet and on sheet. So we're well below our threshold here of 1,000, but like I said, always room for improvement, right? So let's take a closer look at this. As I expand it, you can also see that I have this itemized list similar to the view types in the project browser. But what's really useful is I can also get a count without even looking at the individual views. I can see where I have the most view types, like drafting views and detailed views and so on. And unlike the project browser, I can also check multiple categories at once and do edits on them or potentially delete them if I know for sure I don't need them. So when I do view cleanup, I usually focus on 3 types of views. I focus on 3D views, as I mentioned. I also focus on section views. And the reason I focus on section views is because these views are usually created in the project and people kind of forget about them as working views. So they're usually an easy place to start cleaning up. And finally, I focus on drafting or detailed views. And I usually focus on cleaning up these 2D views further on in the construction document phase. And the reason I like looking at these drafting views is because when you're deleting the view, you're not only deleting the view itself, you're also deleting all of the annotation elements that are packaged in that drafting view. So you can really get a better bang for your buck cleaning up these views. Another thing that I look for is if a view is kind of well named. If a view is not well named, then I kind of don't feel that bad about getting rid of it. Like all of these views, 1, 2, 3, and so on, these are probably views that were created and forgotten about. And we know for sure that they're not on sheets because we have that filter on. So this can be a really great strategy to select multiple views at once and clean them out of the model. Now, we as BIM managers know that we didn't create all of these views, right? There's lots of people on a project, they're all creating their own views, and it would be best if they cleaned up their own views. And a tool to do that I really like is you can export the elements in question from Explorer directly into an Excel document. So what I'll often do is if I'm focusing on a specific category like views not on sheets, I'll check that on. And then what I can do is export an Excel document of this. And I love this tool. So this shows us all of our views not on sheets. And even more importantly, it actually shows us who created those views, right? So now we have a little bit more ownership over the elements we're creating in our model. So I'm going to click export on this, and I'll just save it to my desktop for now. And yes, I would like to open it. All right, so here we have our isolated list of views that are not on sheets. And we also have this category created by. Now, for this project, you might have noticed I created all of these views. That's not actually the case. I actually, saved as this model, but in a real world project, there would be a list of all of the users creating elements in the project. And what I'll often do is to kind of share the load of cleanup, I will create an isolated list of each users and the views that they've created, present it to them and say, hey, can you take a second look at these views not on sheets? If you'd like to keep any of these views, can you give them a better name? And if you don't need these views, can you delete them from the project? Because I'm going to be doing a big view purge at the end of the week. I want to make sure I don't delete any views you need from the project. So this is a really great way to help people get ownership over the elements that they're creating and have a better understanding of the impact that their elements play in the model, and hopefully kind of democratize this cleanup, because model maintenance and this type of cleanup really should be shared by the whole team and not just one user on the project. So this is a strategy I really like to use. Okay. So with that, let's switch gears to our final topic, warnings. So warnings, there are tools within Revit to get a better handle of your warnings. You can find that under the Manage tab, but the interface to me is not the nicest. An interface I much prefer is the Ideate Explorer interface, and we've mostly been focusing on the Explorer tab within this presentation. But let's now switch gears and look at the Warnings tab. And this is such a beautiful interface. When I started using this interface, I think I became a better BIM manager because I really started to understand the cost of individual warnings in the model. And this shouldn't be news to anyone. Warnings in a model cause performance issues. That's like the foundation of performance in Revit and understanding it. Now, this interface actually helps us visualize and prioritize how we attack these warnings. So in red, we have these warnings that are kind of categorized to play a bigger impact in our project. And warnings that are in green or white kind of play a lesser role within the performance of the project. So we can now understand that if we, get rid of these top category warnings, we can then get much better performance and greater bang for our buck when focusing on these top categories. And much like the warnings interface in Revit, we can click on the element, get some information about it, double click to open up a view with it as well. So a lot of the same features, but kind of visually presented in such a way that it's easier to consume. So this is a really nice starting point. You can kind of see that these warnings that are in red are mostly focused on geometry calculation. That usually plays the biggest performance role in Revit warning wise. And these warnings that are in green kind of focus more so on like annotation related warnings. So they play a lesser impact in performance, but you also have greater editability to focus up some of these warnings. So for instance, you can see here that elements have duplicate X value is kind of in the green category, but this warning might be very important to you. Let's say, for instance, I'm creating an existing conditions building, and part of the contractual obligations is to make sure that the room names and numbers are accurate to real world name and numbers of those rooms. So something like this element has duplicate values might play a bigger role in my calculus here. I might want to make sure that I really get rid of those. So I can actually reprioritize this warning to be a little bit higher in our categories here. So the way we would do that is we go to our sprocket here, we go to manage warnings, and here we have that complete list of warnings and how they're currently prioritized. I can search for my warning in question here. And here it is. So this is currently under the green value right here, but I can right click on this and put this to high, right? I want my team to make sure that they really cover these warnings here. I can hit save. And you can see already it's been reprioritized to the top here. So focusing up on these top category warnings is going to give you much better overall performance in your model, and hopefully at the end of the day save you time and money in these processing costs that are associated with using Revit. And that's always a priority of me, is saving time and working efficiently in a project. So I hope that some of the workflows that I showed you today can help you prioritize cleanup and maintenance of your model to get that time back in your day. So with that, I am going to wrap up this side of presentations. Maybe I can switch gears to answer some questions, but just a reminder, if any of the topics today in this class were of interest, definitely check out my LinkedIn Learning course. I think it might have also been put in the chat as well, but I go into much more detail on these individual topics and go through even more more advanced topics as well in that course with Ideate tools. So with that, maybe I can open it up to questions, concerns.
Thank you very much, Olivia. That was fantastic. It was really, really good. Even I learned something there as well, which is really it's always good to do. Yes, I did put a link to your LinkedIn Learning course in the chat panel, so that's there for users, for attendees to look at. Then we had a couple of questions. One from Adam, which was, this is more of an Ideate Software, a question about Ideate automation being included in standard bundle membership, and I've already answered the question. So yeah, Ideate automation is a separate application. It's not related to the in Revit bundle at all, and it would be a separate purchase for anyone interested in buying Ideate automation. I have a question here from Lucas, and I think this is when you were doing cleaning up views with Ideate Explorer, and he says, what about dependent views which are placed on sheets but their parent view isn't? So I'm not quite sure what the question is.
No, I think I understand. There's actually not an example in this current working project. So, parent and dependent views are, used within Revit to kind of split up a larger floor plan. And you know what? That is a really good question. I don't know if Ideate Explorer would make that specific isolation. I'm pretty sure it would, but usually I didn't really mention this in the presentation so much, but I am not for sure if Ideate Explorer will identify if that parent view is on a sheet or not. I'm thinking it will show up under not on sheet, if I understand your question correctly. However, another method I like to use outside of using Ideate Explorer is just like good naming conventions. So for me, a good rule of thumb, and maybe some people on the call already use this strategy, but I usually have views that are in all caps, go on sheets, and have a certain naming convention. And I usually have working views in sentence case or lowercase to kind of better identify those view types. So even if the views not on sheets were to show up as not on sheets, I could hopefully identify if that view is meant to go on a sheet or it has some dependencies for other parent views. But I think your assumption is correct. I think it would show up under not on sheets. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Olivia. I would just add that Ideate BIM-Link would probably be able to retrieve that information.
That's true.
To determine whether the views are independent views, parent views, and whether the views are placed on sheets. So that's something else that people could look at. That was the question. Yeah, that was Lucas said that's fine. Thanks. Another question. We've got a question here from Adam who says, we're a smaller practice without a dedicated BIM manager, so have less time to sort through everything you have ran through. Are there any items in your maintenance guidelines list that you would really prioritize for practices with less time?
Yeah, okay, so within these categories, imports numero uno for sure. Design options, also silent killer in a project, because there's so much data packed into the design options in place families. For me, performance-wise, those are top, and I guess I should also say warnings. I feel like that is a given, but as far as like element organization, imports, design options, in place families, to me, play the biggest role in performance. But once again, every project's going to be different. That's why I kind of liked to put a threshold for some of these numbers, because if you don't have a lot of design options in your project, there might not be a huge need to focus on that category. But that's my thoughts on those, and maybe other BIM managers have other concepts here they'd like to share. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I've got another one through, and this is more of a general question,
Okay.
and I've got my thoughts on this one. But
Oh, yeah.
how much time a week should I spend on Revit model management?
I think this
I know it's
strongly.
an open-ended question, I know, but
No, I want to hear your thoughts too. Maybe I'll jump in here because I have a lot of thoughts on
yeah,
this.
sure, of course.
But I think it really depends on the size of the project and the number of people on your team. So if this is a large campus project, multi-model project, I feel like, several hours a week would make sense for model maintenance. If it's a single project that has, maybe one or two linked files together, maybe just like an hour a week or less to kind of manage that. Now, in my experience, the model maintenance usually comes up when the project is in a crisis period. They need a lot of help for cleanup. So in those kind of scenarios, there's usually a bigger lift to kind of clean up the model from maybe some mistakes or oversights. But long term, less than an hour a week on most projects. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, similar to you really, Olivia. I mean, when I was BIM management, we used to get teams to spend about an hour a week on this kind of maintenance sort of tasks, and we would share that across the team. So it would be in everyone's calendar that your week, this week you're doing some model maintenance, and that would involve cleaning up the views, trying to address some of the warnings, checking through the detail groups and model groups as well. So yeah, I think that's a really good rule of thumb. The question's coming through thick and fast now. So Craig Lawton,
Okay.
is there a way to identify elements no longer attached to their hosts? As I know this is also a performance killer.
No longer attached to their hosts. That's interesting. That's a really good point. I'm not entirely sure. Do you know the answer to this? I don't know if there's a way with Ideate Explorer. I think there's a way. BIMLink has some tools to identify family hosting dependencies.
And the example that Craig has mentioned is walls attached to floors. Okay, so it's that. Okay, that's the warning you get, isn't it? When
the warnings. I see. Yes, so these would definitely show up as warnings. And yes, you're right. They do play a huge performance role because once again, it's that geometry calculation. That's a killer in Revit models. So that should show up in this list here. I'm pretty sure.
Link. Someone's asking about the link from today's webinar. Yeah, that'll be sent out in communications. Maybe, I'm not sure when that date will go out, but you will get a link to a copy of the recording. Another question here: can you talk about ways you break up models and working on large models? Separate Revit models for shell and floors, and this is another open-ended question. We could do a whole session just on this. So what would you? Yeah, any kind of best practice tips for breaking up models and large projects?
This is so opportune. I recently was talking with a team about this. So there's two primary strategies to use. Either create a whole new clean Revit model and then copy in the elements that you need from the previous model, or create 2 copies of the model and then delete the corresponding elements that you want to get rid of from either model. And the strategy really depends on what you were copying over or what you want to split out. So if it's like a primary, like core and shell split out from interiors, I might make a copy of the model and delete strategically from either model. If it's something like creating purely like a furniture or equipment separate model, I might make a fresh new model and then just copy in the specific elements that I need into that new model. But, you know, it's interesting you bring this up because I usually use Ideate to accomplish this. And a lot of the filters I use for that type of copying is, I think I filter by level. This is a really useful way to identify what is hosted to what level. So a lot of the like copying that I'm talking about, you know, most elements in Revit are going to be hosted to a level. So, you know, now you can like select everything that is hosted to that level, and hopefully the copying will be a little bit easier because you can make sure if certain elements within a certain category are brought over to your other model, or if you're using that strategy of copying 2 models, you can delete them out of the model level by level. So I think this sort by level is super useful for that. But case by case basis.
Yeah, absolutely. That was what I was going to say. It really does depend on the size of the project and whether you're working with other consultants. Typically, kind of shell and core interiors kind of split. We would do but then there is a problem. You do have problems with that with around detailing and all that kind of stuff. And I can remember splitting a model up and then the team pushing it all back together again because it worked better for them. So it really does depend on a case by case basis. This is an interesting one. Do you run model maintenance whilst other users are in the model?
I mean, it depends on what we're doing exactly. So I think maybe the question is, do I do cleanup while other users are in the model? Because model maintenance, I mean, you know, I could run model metrics with other users in the model, no problemo. But, you know, doing cleanup, there could be interactions with other users that I might want to avoid. So it depends on the type of cleanup, but I do often like put in my calendar for the rest of the team, hey, we're doing some cleanup, get out of the model, right? So for a lot of this cleanup, I do request people get out of the model. However, for certain things like cleaning up views, you don't necessarily have to have people out of the model if they're aware that, you know, things are getting cleaned up in the model. So it does depend on the topics that you're focusing on.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just check. We've got all of them. I've answered a few. There's a few I've answered in whilst we're talking away there. I think that's everything. I think that's all the questions. Any more questions? No, we had a few questions. That was good. So yeah, we're just about at the top of the hour. So I just want to say thanks once again to Olivia for that very, very insightful webinar. It certainly got people thinking about their Revit model maintenance and Revit model health, which is always, it's an often overlooked part of any Revit project, but very, very so important in terms of productivity and keeping things running smoothly. So if there are no further questions at all, I will let you get on with the rest of your day. As I say, a link to the recording will be sent out shortly, but if there's no more questions, we will sign off and say thank you very much. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me, and everyone have a good day. I really appreciate the time to speak.
No problem at all. Thanks a lot, Olivia.
Okay.